Welcome to the Amateur Redneck Workshop. I'm Harold. Today is going to be a different kind of show. We're not going to machine anything. We're gonna talk about a few things, including changes to the channel. In the first place, the first change to the channel is that Cerberus is going to go back to Hades and on a permanent assignment there, and Amateur Redneck Workshop is going to be the name of the channel. And my name's going to be Harold, and so that's that's quite a change, and I hope I don't have anybody get lost in the midst of doing this and not know where to go. But so far I've watched other people change their channel name, and YouTube has changed everything right along with it. And if you've clicked on the little notifications gear that's right beside the subscribe button, you'll get notified of all the stuff that come with Amateur Redneck Workshop. So it's not like I was going to totally disappear. Another thing we're going to talk about today, instead of machinings, we're going to talk about old-time radio. Now, old-time radio is considered to be from the beginning of radio up until the 1950s. Somewhere in the 1950s. I'm not certain exactly where a person would draw the line, because different people draw it in different places. But an awful lot of the shows that some of you grew up with on television, and when I say some of you, I mean people probably 50 or over, were on the radio before they were on television. Shows like Dragnet, Gunsmoke, Have Gun Will Travel, Highway Patrol. These shows actually were on the radio, and they had different characters. And these different characters, of course, were quite often played by someone else on the radio than was played on television. Take Gunsmoke for example. If you're from around the U.S. and you're, at least as young as 40 or so, I'm sure that Gunsmoke is something a show you've watched. It was probably the longest running television series ever, and it was on radio even before it was on the television. And there was a big change from the radio. In fact, Gunsmoke started out with a different guy. James Arness was not Matt Dillon, and Amanda Blake was not Kitty. I'll sort of almost have to read you a little article here to make it clear, because I'm not going to remember everything, of what there is to know about this. What we'll start off with is telling you how it started. And in the late 1940s, CBS chairman William S. Paley, who was a big fan of the Adventures of Philip Marlowe radio serial, he asked his programming chief, Hubble Robinson, to develop a hard-boiled Western series. So Robinson contacted his West Coast CBS Vice President Harry Ackerman, who'd created the Philip Marlowe series, to take on the task. So Ackerman and his writers created an audition script called Mark Dillon Goes to Gouge Eye. And they made two editions, one in 1949. The first was a lot like a hard-boiled detective series and starred Rye Billsbury as Dillon. The second starred straight-era actor Howard Culver. He was in a more Western, lighter version of the same script. CBS liked the Culver version better, and Ackerman was given the green light to proceed. But like as happens often, there was a complication. Culver's contract as a star of straight era wouldn't allow him to do another Western series. So they stuck the project on the shelf, and 3 years later, Norman MacDonald and John Measton discovered it, and they were at the time looking to create an adult Western series of their own. So they wanted to create a radio Western for adults, in contrast to the prevailing juvenile fare such as the Lone Ranger and the Cisco Kid, such as that. So Gunsmoke fit the bill. Gunsmoke was set in Dodge City, Kansas during the thriving cattle days of the 1870s. Dunning notes the show drew critical acclaim for unprecedented realism, and I think it probably did. He also writes that among old-time radio fans, Gunsmoke is routinely placed among the best shows of any kind at any time. And I can vouch for that, because when I wanted to watch something on television, if Gunsmoke was there, it didn't matter what else you had. I was watching Gunsmoke, and a lot of times I'd even watch a rerun over somebody else's new show. So, and that's just me. But anyway, the radio series first started out in April of 1952. Billy the Kid was written by Walter Newman, and that was the name of that particular episode, and it ran until not Billy the Kid, but Gunsmoke ran until June 18, 1961 on CBS. And it starred William Conrad, not James Arness, but William Conrad as Marshal Matt Dillon. Howard McNear was ghoulish, brittle, and then as the series progressed, kind-hearted Doc Charles Adams. And you can see the difference in the two Doc Adams, the one on the radio and the one on TV, because the Doc Adams on the radio was always hoping somebody would get shot so he could patch him up, you know. And I think he did the Undertaker work too, so he was, you know, waiting for somebody to get buried. Anyway, Georgia Ellis was Kitty Russell, and Pearlie Bear was Dillon's assistant, Chester Proudfoot. He wasn't his deputy on the radio, he was his assistant. And on the television series, Doc's first name was changed to Galen. Chester's last name was changed to Good. So there's a little, not only did they get new characters, but they got new names. Chester's character had no surname until Proudfoot was ad-libbed by Bear during an early rehearsal, while Doc Adams was named after cartoonist Charles Adams. In a 1953 interview with Time, McDonald declared, "Kitty is just someone Matt has to visit every once in a while. We never say it, but Kitty is a prostitute, plain and simple." That's what, you know, McDonald declared. And William Conrad was actually one of the last actors who auditioned for the role of Marshal Dillon. He was already one of radio's busiest actors, and he had a powerful and distinctive baritone voice. And he does. He's got a nice deep voice, and he definitely sounds like Marshal Dillon. All right. Although Meston championed him, McDonald thought that Conrad might be overexposed. During his audition, though, Conrad won over McDonald after reading just a few lines, and he had a great distinction from other radio westerns. All right, the show was distinct from other radio westerns, as the dialogue was often slow and halting, and due to the outstanding sound effects, listeners had a nearly palpable sense of the prairie terrain where the show was set. Now, I know this looks a lot like I'm doing too much reading off, but it's an awful lot of information to give you, and I can't remember it all. If I would spend a week memorizing it, that'd be a lot of wasted time. Anyway, John Dunning writes that the listener heard extraneous dialogue in the background. Just above the muted shots of kids playing in an alley, you heard noises from the next block, too, where the inevitable dog was barking. Dillon was portrayed by Conrad was a lonely, isolated man, toughened by hard life. Meston relished the upending of cherished Western fiction cliches, and thought that few Westerns gave any inkling of how brutal was the Old West. Dunning writes that Meston was especially disgusted by the archetypical Western hero and set out to destroy that type of character he loathed, you know. In Meston's view, Dillon was almost as scarred as the homicidal psychopaths who drifted into Dodge from all directions. That's pretty much sounds like a lot of the drifters from back in the Old West. Dunning writes that Dillon played his hand and often lost. He arrived too late to prevent a lynching. He amputated the dying man's leg and lost the patient anyway. He saved a girl from brutal rapists and found himself unable to offer her what she needed to stop her from moving into life as a prostitute. Some listeners, such as Vintage Radio Authority Dunning, have argued that the radio version of Gunsmoke was far more realistic than the TV series. And it may have been. It was certainly good. Episodes were aimed at adults and featured some of the most explicit content of their time, including violent crimes, scalpings, massacres, and opium addicts. Many episodes ended on a somber note, and villains often got away with their crimes. just like in real life. Nonetheless, thanks to the subtle scripts and outstanding ensemble cast over the years, the program evolved into a warm, often humorous celebration of human nature. And it was almost, right on the edge of too friendly time it got on television. But anyway, talk of adapting Gunsmoke to television began, I forget what time it was, somewhere in the 50s or maybe early 60s. I think it was maybe early 60s. And they had a garnered interest in taking the show to television, but publicly, McDonald declared that our show is perfect for radio, and he feared that his Dunning Wright's Gunsmoke, confined by a picture, couldn't possibly be as authentic or attentive to detail. In the end, writes Dunning, CBS simply took it away from McDonald and began preparing for the television version of Gunsmoke. And Conrad and the others was given auditions, but they were just the token efforts because they didn't intend to take them anyway, especially not in Conrad's case because due to his obesity, he didn't look like, didn't look like Matt Dillon. He looked like a little short guy with a big belly. And if anybody ever watched the show Cannon, that's our man. He was starring in that show. And you wonder how he can run around as a detective and, get into fights when he looks like that. But, that's how it goes. The radio fans consider the TV show a sham and its players imposters. And that doesn't surprise anybody, I'm sure. But the TV show was not a sham, due in no small part to the continued strength of Meston's efforts in his scripts. McDonald and Meston continued the radio version of Gunsmoke until 1961, making it one of the most enduring vintage radio dramas. The Gunsmoke radio theme song and later TV theme was titled Old Trails, also known as Boot Hill. The theme was written by Rex Corey and Glenn Spencer. The original radio version was conducted by Rex Corey. The TV version was thought to have first been conducted by CBS West Coast music director Lud Gluskin. And there's differences between the characters on the radio and TV version of Gunsmoke. The radio doc was acerbic, somewhat mercenary, and borderline alcoholic, at least in the program's early years. The television Doc Adams, well, he was still crusty, but he was a lot softer and warmer. And Miss Kitty, who in the radio series likely engaged in prostitution, was viewed more as the proprietor of a saloon on the television series, and except for a few early scripts taken from the radio, viewers only saw Miss Kitty as a kind-hearted businesswoman, almost a virgin. So in the fair use thing, I'm going to just give you just the start of Gunsmoke from 1952 here. It is an episode called Billy the Kid. I don't want to get YouTube and their censors down on me for plagiarizing anything. But here we go.
Around Dodge City, in the territory on West, there's just one way to handle the killers and the spoilers, and that's with a U.S. Marshal and the smell of Gunsmoke.
So there you go. That was William Conrad, and he cranks off Gunsmoke like that every day. They have it for years. So that wasn't the only show that was on the radio, though. My very absolute most favorite show of all was called I Love a Mystery, and it was written by a guy named Morris, and he was a real excellent writer. And the bad thing about I Love a Mystery is that so few episodes have been left over, for people to find. And so big sections of some of the episodes, of the series that were included in it, big sections are just empty, missing. And, there's a couple of times you don't even know how the story came out. Which is probably a good time to stop and talk about how they distributed radio shows in the 20s and 30s and 40s and so on. They had what they call transcription discs. And these transcription discs were not the regular, 12-inch size that your long playing records are on. These were 16-inch disc. They had a aluminum base, and they had a shellac or sort of a thing over the top of it, covered it, and then it was pressed like any other disc. So you needed a transcription player to play these, and there's still people that have got them. These transcription players are kind of a lot harder to find now, but you can still get them, and there's still people busy when they can find the new radio show from the old days. I say a new one that hasn't been already recorded. They'll find the guy with the transcription disc, and they'll change it over to MP3. Which brings us up to the point is, where did all this come from? How come I'm in here talking to you about old-time radio shows? Well, for several years before I got interested in other things, I was interested in collecting old-time radio shows, and I was the most minor figure in the old-time radio researchers distribution group. And there was, on Yahoo groups, there was a lot of different groups collecting old radio shows and old movie serials and one thing and another. But the group that sort of got my attention and drew me to it was the Old Time Radio Researchers Group. And their stuff's up on archive.org. It's free for the taking, and there's ages and ages of old-time radio shows, and once you've listened to a couple of them, you'll find out they're a lot more interesting than you had given credit for. And what I did with the Old Time Radio Researchers Group for the last little bit that I was in there was that I would receive the newly put together distribution of a particular radio show, and the researchers group would have certified it as being as complete as possible. And they would have a poll on Yahoo there, and everybody that wanted would sign up. And then they'd send that disc to me, and I would make copies of it. And I'd send one to the group's library, and I'd send another couple of discs to members. And the way the distribution worked was I would send to 2 people, and each of those 2 people would send to 2 people, and each of the 2 that they sent to would send to 2. So pretty soon it would pyramid out, and although it got a really slow start, it would wind up pretty quick in the end. There was problems with people that would receive it and sit on it for a month or 2 and things like that. And there was one sad case. One of the guys that helped us, he before I got to originating the distributions, this other guy did. He was as reliable as a clock. And then one day they sent one out, and I was sort of second in line to receive it, and I didn't see it for a month, and I didn't see it for 2 months, I didn't see it for 3 months, and this started happening. And so I contacted the guy, and he said, "Oh, I didn't know I didn't send that." And so he found it and sent it. And what had happened is the poor fellow he'd come down with Alzheimer's, and he was just getting where he couldn't remember to keep up with these things, And so after I discovered this, well, I notified the rest of the group, that he'd done well for so long, but now he couldn't keep it up. So I took it over for, I don't know, a year or 2, and I had a piece of software written by a professor up there in Canada that would take all the people who had signed up and all their addresses and build a nice shipping list with everybody's home address, and it would distribute the things out through a tree structure so that I could start someplace relatively close and work sort of in a wave across the country and a wave into Canada, and there were even some people in Europe who subscribed to these things. And mostly we just, sent to them as final receivers instead of them having to make copies and send them on, because nobody wants to wait for, a disc to come back across the ocean to somebody else. But anyway, that's how I got interested in old-time radios. And our old time radio shows. And then finally, I got tired of it and gave it up and went to shooting at steel targets. So that's how that goes. But as far as for old time radio, there's just a world of it out there. I've got, I think, 1,240 optical discs full of old time radio shows. Now there's a lot of duplication on there. And on my PC here, I have two terabyte hard drives full of this stuff that is on the discs. What I copied off of all those optical discs. Some of them are CDs, some are DVDs, uh, and most of them are, full up to the gun wheels there. Uh, I would really suggest you go by archive.org and take a look at old time radio, because I'm sure there's stuff in there that you would like. Now, I'm going to give you a shot here of Lum and Abner. And I'll tell you about Lum and Abner first. That Lum and Abner, it was an American network radio comedy. It was created by Chester Locke and Norris Goff, and it aired from 1931 to 1954. Now that may get in there and in close competition to Gunsmoke, because I believe that's longer than Gunsmoke was on the radio, but not necessarily longer than Gunsmoke was on television. Anyway, it's modeled on the life of a small town in Arkansas called Waters, Arkansas. Yeah, folks had it for a little while. And that was near where Locke and Goff grew up, and the show uh, was really popular, and it featured characters that lived around Waters there. And as luck would have it, in 1936, the town of Waters changed its name to Pine Ridge, which was the name of the show's fictional town. In the show, they didn't call it that. They called it Pine Ridge, and not Waters. So, lost my town right there. In fact, I was born and I almost retired before I even found out I ever had a town to lose. But anyway, the two co-stars, they created the show. The main two characters were Lum Edwards and Abner Peabody, or Peabody if you're from up in Massachusetts. And they performed as a double act, and Lum generally played the straight man, and Abner, he had all kind of attempts to break free from Lum's influence and get into trouble in one thing or another. And he wasn't necessarily all that bright a wit, in the show, so he was likely to get in more trouble than not. And this little show came on for about 15 minutes. I don't know, a lot of days. I'm not sure if it was every day, but it was 3 days a week. I think Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And what these guys did is they ran a little grocery store there in Pine Ridge, Arkansas, which used to be Waters, Arkansas. Dang it. And they weren't real, they didn't really get enthusiastic about running the store. Sometimes they'd let the phone ring, and one of them, I asked them, well, you reckon you ought to answer the phone? And he said, no, it's just somebody wanting us to deliver some groceries. And he said, I don't want to go out right now. So they were a bit on the lazy side. And Abner, he had a farm there, but his wife took care of that. That was woman's work, plowing the South 40 and all that sort of thing. And I've known characters like that. But anyway, they had an arch nemesis, and his name was Squire Skimp. And he was always cheating them one way or another. Every time they come across him, he would fleece them out of their money, or he'd fleece them out of their property, or whatever they had that he wanted, he would skin them, And so they got, pretty well always in trouble with, because of Squire Skimp, cheating them and such. And there was a lot of characters in the show, They had Cedric Wehunt and the Grandpappy Spears, and Locke played Grandpappy Spears and Cedric Wehunt, and Goff played Abner and Squire Skimp and Llewellyn, Mousy Gray, Dick Huddleston, and most of the other characters. Now, Dick Huddleston, he was the only normal, sensible guy, I think, in the whole show. And he had a grocery store that he run, properly and all that. And of course, they would always go get advice from him or go visit him or something. And The Jot 'em Down store sometimes would just about go broke, or it shut down because they run out of money, or all kind of different things. And they would always be involved in things like oil wells and get rich quick schemes and such. And so we'll give you just a tiny little shot here of Lum and Abner. Uh, this is an episode from 1933 called Friday Night Sociable. And it starts off, with a bit of music there, which is not necessarily all that necessary. Maybe this is where you could put in a commercial or something, but it didn't go on forever. Just seems like it. We should be getting pretty near the talking part. I think.
Howdy, everybody. Here we are, all ready to take you down to Pine Ridge for the Friday Night Sociable, conducted by Lum and Abner, whose everyday experiences are sent to you each evening, except Saturday and Sunday, by your own local Ford dealer. In my opinion, the new Ford V8 is the most economical car on the market, says Rankin Singley, grocer of Mangum, Oklahoma.
Now we get a Ford commercial there, and the year before the flathead V8 Ford had come out, and it was a really popular car. It was popular up into, I think, 1953. I remember a buddy of mine had one, and I drove it a couple of times, although he wasn't real eager to let me drive it. And it was a nice car for what it was, but flathead 8, that's not not a high compression, high performance engine. But anyway, they were sponsoring Lum and Abner, and later on somebody else did. And I'll move over here at random into the end of the show, and we'll just get them a little bit of talking. They're having a song there. Let's move over a little further. Oh man, that's a long song, undoubtedly. And it's still going. Maybe they're not going to say anything. Yeah, we're going to move over one more time.
She's out in the community here in Pine Ridge. She's on her way out to California to make a new moving picture.
Is she a picture actress?
Oh, yeah, a regular moving picture actress.
I want to touch it.
Now, Miss Langford here is kind of contented to help us out on our little get-up tonight, and we're going to have the hotel orchestra play her accompaniment for her. All right, Miss Langford.
So there you go. Lum and Abner from 1933. There's literally hundreds of episodes of those shows that have survived. I've got probably 4 DVDs of MP3s, and they don't repeat, This wasn't all that there was, and I told you about, I Love a Mystery, and we'll give a little shot of it here. Now, the Morse family is pretty tight with I Love a Mystery, and so I'm not going to proud not to get over the 10 seconds of fair use. If it'll start. Oops, Dad burn it. You know who that is.
A fiery horse with the speed of light, a cloud of dust, and a hearty hi-yo silver, the Lone Ranger.
I hit the wrong one, but that was another one, the Lone Ranger. Let me see if I can finally get up here to I Love a Mystery for the Battle of the Century, episode 7. Not even sure how many episodes of that exist.
Mutual Broadcasting System presents I Love a Mystery.
All right, that's my 10 seconds worth. So, yeah, it's a really grand show, and it's unfortunate that most of the episodes have been lost. That it's all written down. The scripts are all written down, and up till recently, the Morse family, where it wasn't too eager for anybody to even look at the scripts, They did in 2009. They had some folks that were going to recreate some of it, but I don't think it ever came to anything because I never heard much of anything out of it. What little bit they did was really poor quality. But I love a Mystery was a nice radio drama. It started in 1939, lasted through 1944. It's about three friends who run a detective agency, and they travel the world in search of adventure. And it's distinguished by the high-octane scripting of Carlton E. Marsh. This program was the polar opposite of Marsh's other success, the long-running One Man's Family. Probably some people have seen that. The central characters, Jack Packard, Doc Long, and Reggie York, they met as mercenary soldiers fighting the Japanese in China. Later, they met again in San Francisco, where they decided to form the A1 Detective Agency. Their motto was no job too tough, no adventure too baffling. The agency served as a plot device to involve the trio in a wide variety of stories. And these saddled a whole bunch of genres, mystery, adventure, supernatural horror, and the plot lines often took them to exotic locales, like South America and Mexico and, I don't know where all. Over the years, Jack was played by Michael Raffetto, Russell Thorson, Jay Novello, Jim Bannon, and John McIntyre. You had a hard time keeping Jack on the job. And Doc was played by Barton Yarborough and Jim Bowles. Reggie was portrayed by Walter Patterson and Tony Randall. So even he wasn't in there too steady. The agency's secretary, Jerry Booker, was played by Gloria Blondell. After Patterson committed suicide in 1942, his friend Marsh couldn't bear to recast the role, and Reggie got written out of the cast, and he was replaced later on with Jerry, the secretary. She replaced Reggie. And there's the story situation and characters are, these guys are tough, charismatic, and they like to have a lot of adventure and, booze it up and get in fights and, all the adventure stuff. And like I say, that was my very favorite show, and it just happens to be the one that there's the least of. So there you go. There's still people out hunting transcription discs in flea markets and people's attics and garages, and once in a while they find one that nobody's found before, and they'll bring it back and convert it to MP3. But so far, nobody's found all those missing I Love Mystery shows. I think they're pretty much permanently, totally gone. I'm sure you're probably getting tired of all this radio show talk anyway, so I'm going to give you a short shot of moon over Africa, and then we'll go to the redneck joke.
African drums are talking. Over weary wastes of veldt and jungle, the drums bring you a story of Africa. Africa, that land of mystery and strange ritual, ebony bodies, witch doctors, and sudden death. The land of jungle and impenetrable swamp, where the primeval sweat of Mother Earth rises in miasmic clouds of fever-ridden vapor to hang suspended in the foliage of the ageless guardians of the jungle.
All you got to do to listen to all these thousands of hours of radio, and some of it's not any good, just like some of the TV these days isn't any good, but there's a lot of good stuff out there, and it's free. All you got to do is to go to archive.org, look for the Old Time Radio Distribution Group, or just search for OTR, which stands for Old Time Radio, and you can get loaded up with already cleaned up stuff. That this stuff wasn't exactly in pristine condition when they found it. Some of it was on wire recordings, where they used a wire for recording before they had tape. An awful lot of it was on transcription discs, and they were often scratched and cracked and had all manner of problems. And these guys worked long and hard to clean them up so that they sound good, and they they went back to the newspapers, and there were books that were made from the newspapers that had all the list of the radio shows that were on every day. And they would go back and dig through the library through these old newspapers and find out what day this show came on and what the exact correct name of it was, and all that information they assembled on these DVDs and CDs. Some of the later ones were maybe 4 or 5 DVDs because they had improved the quality of a lot of stuff. Gunsmoke for years the sound was just terrible, and then they finally got it cleaned up and they got all the weird stuff out of it. Some guy'd go along and he would, at odd places, he would play something from the beginning of the show right in the middle of it. And the early recordings that the group had of Gunsmoke were pretty bad. But the latest version that they've come out with, I think is version 4, is clean and clear and very entertaining. So remember, if you want Sam Spade, Mike Hammer, horror shows, X-1, that's a space show. There's a lot of whatever kind of thing you can think of, it's there on archive.org, and it's been prepared by the Old Time Radio, researchers group, and you'll like it. All right, so now I'm going to take a little break to drink a cup of coffee, and then I'll come back and give you your redneck joke, which is winding up at the end today instead of at the beginning. And then I'll remind you again when I get through as to what's next. Okay, so today's redneck joke is an Irish joke. Tricked you, didn't I? Anyway, so these two guys wander in the bar somewhere in Boston, in the Irish end of town, and they say, hello, how you doing, and all that. And one of them says to the other, he says, you sound like you might be Irish. He says, I am. He says, they ask, well, I am too. He says, where are you from? And he says, Cork. He says, I'm from Cork. What part? And he says, St. Mary's Park. And he says, Holy Mother of Jesus, I'm from St. Mary's. What school did you go to? He says, St. Killian's. And he says, no fucking way. I went to there, and so on. The conversation rolls on, and so the barman gets a call on the phone, and it's the owner, and he says, hi, boss. And he says, yes, boss. No, boss. Pretty quiet for a Monday morning. He says, but the old Connell twins are drunk again, Well, I'm sorry. Maybe it was a pretty good joke. I'll just have to own up that it was and stick to it. All right, remember next week, services return to Hades. The name of the show is Amateur Redneck Workshop, and I'm Harold, and service is going to be gone. And I may wind up, if I can manage it between now and then, with a new logo that looks a lot like the current one, but without Cerberus or the dogs, or, I'm going to have to do it myself because I can't find Mario, my graphics designer. So, anyway, if you made it this far and you suffered through it all, thank you, and I appreciate you viewing, and I hope you'll come back again. And I'm sorry it got so long. I just got carried away. And please subscribe.